Hi, I'm John Nerrell, and welcome to the Mid-Career GPS podcast. If you're feeling stuck in your career and overwhelmed by what steps to take, I can help you. As an executive and career transition coach, I help my clients prepare, position, and promote who they are and what they do to show up and find a job they love or love the job they have. It's time to start building your mid-career GPS. So let's get started. Hi, my friends. Welcome back to the podcast. If you listened to last week's episode where I shared a story about the job I held for 5 weeks that changed my life and career, primarily because of the wonderful manager I had, please go check it out. It's episode number 60, because as you build and navigate your mid-career GPS, you have an opportunity to show up and lead in many impactful and memorable ways. Now, the pandemic has dramatically shaped how we live, work, and lead. It's given us time to reflect, consider, and of course, take action about what we want and how we want to lead our teams, our organizations, and ourselves. And my guest today knows a few things about leadership, and I've invited him onto the podcast to share with us about what it means to lead and manage people in a post-pandemic world. Sam Palazzolo developed his ideas for his first book, The Influential Leader, after discovering the principles of influence and persuasion and how they could be implemented and executed at Toyota Lexus, taking the manufacturer from number 4 to number 1 in their domestic pursuits. Sam has worked with over 1,000 organizations, both domestically in the US and abroad. Sam went on to lead a technology startup raising $8 million, which allowed them to develop cutting-edge technology, deliver a best-in-class customer experience, and crush revenue targets. This ultimately led to a successful private equity exit for him. And in doing so, he quote unquote, put the band back together in forming Tip of the Spear Ventures, where there are two sides of the house, a venture firm and a consultancy. Sam is an advocate of accelerated learning techniques and is an avid education activist who has instructed at the collegiate level since 2008. In 2017, Sam founded the Javelin Institute, a 501c3 nonprofit that provides executive education so that a portion of the profits are provided to those leaders who experience family hardship. Sam's been invited to speak at some of the world's most innovative organizations that include Amazon, Starbucks, General Mills, Microsoft, the Department of Defense, Harvard Business School, Dartmouth University, the University of Texas, and Vanderbilt University. And he's also been invited to speak and keynote at world-renowned conferences and summits. Now, to give you an idea about his education background, he has a bachelor's degree in business economics and public policy from Indiana University, and he received his MBA from Vanderbilt. He has also accomplished additional graduate studies from the University of Texas, where he studied coaching, the University of Michigan, where he studied sales and negotiation, Northwest University, where he studied digital strategy, and the University of London, where he studied business funding. Sam, you are so impressive. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. We're going to transcribe that, by the way. That makes me sound way too great. Thank you so much.
You know, I always love it when my guests get to hear the introduction back to them, because so much so as we build these GPSs for our professional life, we very rarely get time to hear it all come back to us. So it's one of the things I really love about having guests on the podcast, where you get to hear all this stuff come back. And we just get to spend a little time today and talk a little bit about your career journey and what that's all like. So again, thanks for being here.
Oh, welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Sam, as we get started, tell us what you wanted to be growing up.
I was, as my mother likes to say, I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, in the shadow of a Ford manufacturing plant's smokestack. So I think that in growing up in Detroit, I had the vision that I wanted to be a stunt man. I either wanted to be a stunt man in Hollywood or ironically, I wanted to be a ranger.
Okay.
Not a forest ranger. I wanted to be a U.S. Army Ranger, special ops kind of guy. My high school counselor talked me out of it because they said, you're a city kid. You're going to hate being a ranger." And I was like, "Not a forest ranger." So those were my two primary paths. But I think deep rooted within all of that, I come from a long line of accountants. My father was an accountant. My grandfather was an accountant. My great grandfather counted sheep back in Italy. And so that is kind of the business tone that was set for me. And that's where I initially started out my career, is within an accounting function within General Motors. So
Fascinating. And one of the reasons why I wanted you to come onto the podcast is you've got some great work and background in terms of helping people lead and manage in this post-pandemic world. And I often think how if we were to go back to March of 2020, when basically we saw the world start shutting down, a lot of us didn't think that come October of 2021, we would still be in this state of influx and where everything is going in terms of work. So to help us set the stage a little bit, can you define for us how you differentiate between leading and managing?
I think this is a great conversation, and certainly is one that when I worked with the University of Texas, we spent a lot of time debating what's the difference between a leader and a manager. This is where I have one of my certifications. It's in coaching. I also went on to work with the University of Texas with their MBA program. They offer executive coaching to their MBAs, executive MBAs that are going through their programs. I look at the differentiator between the two as managers are basically nose to the grindstone, working on the day in, day out functions that help a business operate effectively. Leaders, on the other hand, not that they don't have manager characteristics throughout their day as well, but they spend a minority and sometimes a majority of their time kind of looking forward, architecting strategic direction, identifying what are the tactical moments and how are we going to actually execute that strategic plan. So those are the two primary differences that I look at when it comes to the differences between managerial versus leadership capacities.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a good differentiator. So when we talk about how leaders have had to pivot or be a little bit different in this post-pandemic world, for you, what does it mean to lead in this, what really can only be described as an exceptional time in our lives and careers right now?
Yeah, I think that there's two thoughts that come to my mind with what it is that a leader has need to do successfully since March of 2020. The first one is this agility concept, right? This is the ability to, if what is working or what's worked in the past is no longer working, you need to make a change. This is the current pivot word, right? Where you need to identify, okay, great, that's not working. Not that you necessarily have to have best practice or this is what we're going to do in a known capacity, because a lot of leaders don't know, right, where it is that they're going to go or what's going to be successful. The pandemic was the ultimate plot twist in the movie or in a career movie, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's the first thing, is having more of those agile techniques and those types of capacities as a leader. Whatever comes at you, just recognize that, you know what, we're going to be able to handle it. But first and foremost, let's figure out, is it working? If it is, great, let's continue to let it work. If it's not working, or maybe it's not hitting potential, let's see how we may be able to make that better. I really look at that first aspect, the agility moment, as one that I don't think that that's different mm-hmm. from a managerial capacity or leadership mm-hmm. position, right? Good leaders have always been agile with how it is that they approach the workplace and the functions they're in. But I think the second area that I'll share with you is different. And it's the whole thought of approaching the team that you work with empathy and compassion. And the team that you work with can be both internal to the organization, your team members, and external from a client perspective. But this empathy and compassion moment, empathy is putting yourself in their shoes, so that way you can actually see what it is that they're going through in a day in, day out manner. But the compassion moment is a unique one, and it's different. And it's one where I see leaders missing the boat on. This is the ability to not only walk a mile in their shoes with empathy, but the compassion moment comes from and your shoes are too tight recognition. And if your shoes are too tight, it's probably not going to be a nice walk. So let's figure out how we do things different. Those two concepts, agility, empathy, and compassion, they kind of intertwine and they mix together. And those are the things that I look at leaders who've led successfully coming through the pandemic. Those are the things that I've seen them do better than those who haven't led successfully.
What do you think holds certain leaders back from demonstrating that empathy or compassion that you just talked about?
I think sometimes it's the obvious from they skip over the cracks in the sidewalk, so to speak. They miss the obvious. It's awfully hard to tell somebody that, hey, look, this is our goal for the month. This is what we need to achieve. Or our project isn't coming in on the timeline that we architected. It's awfully hard to have that type of conversation with a team member if they can't figure out how to get toilet paper or how to get some type of cleaning supply, right? It's, in a Maslow hierarchy of need, it's just overshooting what it is that the people you're working with really require in the moment. And I saw a lot of leaders doing that at the beginning of the pandemic, staying the course when the typhoon or the hurricane is approaching is probably not a best practice. As a matter of fact, it's not. So I think it's one of those recognition moments of not skipping over the cracks in the sidewalk. That's one of the concepts that I would share. I think one of the other things, though, and this is perhaps more crucial, is that there wasn't really good self-reflection on what it is that they could do different. And here's what I mean by that. I know that leaders at large were faced with really the same items that their team members were faced with, but there wasn't a really good self-recognition or an OODA loop that would allow them to identify what it was that was working effectively for them and perhaps what's not working effectively and implementing changes into their game. I saw more leaders who were successful in those maybe high tide pre-pandemic moments that lifts all boats and allows everyone to navigate safely, really run aground when the pandemic struck because they continued to chart the same course and they thought that was going to be what got them through. Not a good moment.
Agreed. I love what Brene Brown has said about how let's just acknowledge we've never been through this before and it's going to be messy. We're not going to be perfect. We're all trying to figure this out. And I love the example that you shared about how a lot of times leaders and managers may not be aware of what's going on with a team member, right? A lot of the people who listen to this podcast and the people I work with are at that very pivotal and transitional stage in their lives where they're dealing with their parents getting older. And some are needing a little bit more care than others. And so they do their best to hold it together day in and day out, but realizing that they're juggling kids, they're juggling parents, they're juggling their own parental lives or their caregiver lives and everything. And the whole thing about how we keep work and we keep life and we never let the two integrate. We've really gotten to a point where we're forced to kind of meld them together to find a way to work successfully.
No, you're exactly right. We see this now as we're approaching, hopefully, some type of an end to the pandemic, where people are returning back to work. One of the organizations that we have a relationship with on the consulting side of the firm, they want to get back into the commercial office space. I mean, I understand the desire, right? They don't need to, though. And as a matter of fact, some of the people who've been working from home have done far better than they would have if they were back in the workplace. Long story short, they gave a kind of an edict of, we're all going to be back in the workplace by this date. And one of the team leaders that we worked with on a one-on-one capacity outreach to us and said, hey, look, I don't get it. Why would they want me and my team to come back? We have overshot our productivity during this time period. I almost 2x. They're almost twice as productive as they were working in the commercial office space pre-pandemic. Well, I don't understand why they would want us to come back. We work with the leadership of the organization to help them identify that. Let's take a look at all of the teams and who it is that we're requesting to come back. And maybe let's take a look at this policy. Because while I think it was important for the senior leaders who, let's face it, they weren't going to be returning back to the workplace, they felt it was important for everybody else within the organization to return back. They thought it would give them more of a teamwork, maybe more of that dynamic that would allow them to surpass some of their competitors. But it is one of those things where I give that leadership team a lot of credit because they went back, they looked at this policy, and they totally revised it. Where they drew the hard line in the sand or even in the cement saying you need to be in on this date. If you can't do it, you're probably going to need to go and find work somewhere else, to really be going into one of those, you know what, this work from home has really worked. And as a matter of fact, we're going to become an advocate for it. And it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, their financial expenditure, I'm still an accountant by training, and that
Sure, yeah.
right? On their balance sheet or on their expense statements, that you should see the dollar value. It's approaching 7 digits for the amount of capital that they've invested to allow their associates to work successfully at home. But they looked at that expense structure. They looked at the productivity, most importantly, and they also tapped into an employee satisfaction survey just to see what their preferences were. You know, the pandemic's been different, not because it's been how are we going to go about doing business? The pandemic is the ultimate curveball being thrown to organizations, because if you don't do it right, it's not that we're going to miss our objectives for the quarter. We could be putting our team members' lives at risk, and their health and well-being has to be foremost and present in whatever policies it is that organizations drive, especially as we're coming through the pandemic here and potentially facing those return to work decisions.
That's so well said. And I love how you phrased all of that. I'm curious, Sam, what either would you say or have you said, given your experience, to the executive or the leader who is advocating for people to come back to the work site because there's a lot of things that they're quote unquote missing? They're missing the conversations on the way to and from the conference room. They're missing the opportunity to go out to lunch or the collegiality that happens when they're all in the same space. How do you address those things that people say, well, they're missing out on all of these things and it's important for them to still be back?
Yeah, I think that there should be a fear of missing out, right? This is the almost ultimate FOMO moment where you've got leaders who want to stay engaged. You have team members who want to stay engaged as well. And, you know, we've been an early adopter, a pioneer within this whole virtual meeting space. It's what the tech startup I helped lead from 2010 to 2012 was. And I say, it's what allowed me to have a traumatic impact on not only those I work with, but those maybe in a cursory moment, you know, from just coming into contact with them and explaining some different things. These types of virtual meetings are really successful if managers and leaders come to them with an open mind and really take the time to conduct them. I know there's such a thing as Zoom fatigue. And yes, it gets kind of exhausting to be on camera all the time because you're constantly on, right? And what's worse about it in a work from home capacity is that when you step foot outside of your office, if you're fortunate enough to have a home office, you're right in the family dynamic. Whereas you might have had that nice on-ramp to get yourself ready for the day as you commuted into the office, and then a nice off-ramp as you went home in the afternoon or evening. Yeah, so you're kind of burning the fatigue moment at both ends of the candle, if you will. You're on a Zoom camera all day long, so you're constantly on camera. You're also then jumped right back into the family dynamic with no on-ramp or off-ramp opportunity. And so there's a sensitivity that needs to be played therein. But it doesn't mean that you can't manage your time effectively to make certain that you have some of those special moments. Maybe it is one of those virtual cups of coffee with a team member that would replace the meeting at the coffee machine. Maybe it's a going to lunch. I know that a couple of the organizations that we worked with, I want to say they threw some of the best happy hour get togethers ever, including a DJ, an electronic DJ where he was a participant to the meeting. But it is one of those things where after they recognize, this probably isn't beneficial for us or long term, we can't sustain that. But they kept on having those types of get-togethers and meetings, not necessarily only after hours, but as well as before the workday as well. Just the opportunity to kind of get together, have a cup of coffee, see what was going on in each other's lives. Granted, it was pretty easy to see what was going on in some people's lives. I had a meeting the other day. The gentleman's cat jumped up on his lap and was eating his microphone or scratching the microphone. So real easy to see that. And when I was in the early part of my career, I remember I was on a conference call and it was my big opportunity to present for the region I was responsible for. My daughter, who at the time was 2, I kept on telling her, honey, don't play with the door. You're going to slam your fingers in the door. Sure enough, she slammed her fingers in the door, let out this shriek like only a 2-year-old can do. And I remember the gentleman who was our leader at Toyota, he came on and he said, hey, Sam, it sounds like you've got something going on in the background that you need to attend to. Why don't you go take care of that and we'll circle back to you. Nice. So probably one of the nicer moments that I've ever had. Right. But that was the Toyota way, which I loved for so many years.
That's great. I have a rule. I love the fact that in this pandemic, we have been able to network very individually and specifically. We don't have to be in the big room and pass out the business cards. We get to have the virtual coffee or have the lunch meeting kind of thing. My ground rule is no egg salad. I don't need to see anybody eat egg salad on a Zoom. I had one person do that and I was like, never again. I just set the ground rule. I'm like, want to eat lunch? Fine. Can't be egg salad. It just grosses me out.
I can see why.
Right. These are the kind of things that we've learned to, adapt and be a little bit agile, but we also get to figure this out. Right. And I'd love for you to share a little bit, if you could, just for anybody who's listening, like what have been your biggest lessons learned over the past 18 months for you in how you've led or your business? What have been the biggest lessons learned for you as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, so there were 2 things. First and foremost, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had a roundtable discussion, a group of consulting heads of consulting firms. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. We met with Patrick Lencioni of the Table Group. And Patrick said something that was really important, that, throw your statements of work out the window, because if you try to hold true to them, it's not going to work. And it's the time to lean in right here, right now. And that's what we did. We threw our statements of work out the window. We leaned in. We conducted nearly 150 webinars just on a variety of different topics and how it is that organizations could really be successful as we entered into that black swan event of the pandemic. And I want to say it was successful for us. Our true barometer was, did we lose any clients? And while other consulting firms saw their clientele either freeze their contracts, discontinue the engagements, close off business, we didn't lose a single client. So from that perspective, I'll hang our hat on. That was the right thing for us to do, which is to throw your statement of work out the window and lean in. The second thing that we did was we reached out to our leaders to identify what was it that they were looking at that were going to allow them to successfully navigate those pandemic waters. So we reached out to about 150 of our leaders just to identify what are they looking at and what are they focused on. And so an organic survey, not a drop down, not a radial, select the items that you're interested in, but really an organic, just free flow the information in. It all came back with, and everything seemed to cluster around 6 primary different keys that the leaders were focused on, as not only they went into the pandemic, but we recently redid the survey. We had a greater response rate, and it's the same 6. So I'll tell you what 2 of them are.
Sure.
The first one is value creation. Now more than ever, leaders need to drive the value creation wagon forward. If their department, regardless of if it's the sales and marketing, regardless of department, they need to focus on what value it is that they bring to the organization to support their value creation principle, right? That's the first thing. The second one, and maybe it goes back to a couple of different things that we've talked about, and that is they need to own the change. We've seen so many leaders during the pandemic either want to call the pandemic, it's the ultimate mulligan, where the pandemic can be blamed for everything, praised for nothing, but the leader who's trying to navigate the pandemic waters isn't owning the change. We saw the leaders who were going through the pandemic successfully at the beginning, as well as those who right here, right now are exiting the pandemic, hopefully successfully. They own the change. They have called the ball. They have made the difference in their team members and in their businesses' lives.
That is so powerful. And what I just want to make the connection here is we talk so much on the podcast about how we show up from a place of value and service. And you just exemplified that, right? For you in your company to lean into that kind of value like you did and serve your clients the way that you did is just a powerful example of what we talk about all the time on this podcast.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be, because I think it's a key differentiator for leaders. Sometimes, and one of the organizations that we worked at, we asked them, what's the culture like here? How would you describe it? How does somebody advance to a leadership position? And they said, oh, we have the screw up, move up policy. And I was like, what is that? And they said, well, I guess on the surface, if you looked at it, we only promote those who screw up. Underneath the layer, if you peel back a layer of the onion, what we're really looking for are leaders who will take a chance, leaders who are looking to innovate within themselves, within their teams and their departments. So that way they're not necessarily doing business as usual. They're looking for the next best way to do business as usual. So perhaps the current business unusual leads to future business as usual moments, but that their screw up, move up policy, one of my favorites.
That's awesome. That is great. Sam, I have so enjoyed our conversation today. I want to thank you for coming on and sharing everything that you did. As we wrap up, what advice would you give someone to help them build their mid-career GPS?
Yeah, I'll give you 2. So we talked about this survey that we conducted for the 6 keys. If you go to tipofthespearventures.com and in the lower right-hand corner, there'll be a chat bot. It's me. I'm the chat bot. You'll see my image. All you need to do is just enter into that chat bot that you want to get a copy or would like to have an executive briefing on what those 6 keys are that leaders are focused on right here, right now. I know in the show notes, we're also going to we put together a 37-page 132 question business transformation self-assessment workbook. It divides our business up into 4 different sections that every leader should look at, but a ton of questions to self-analyze where it is that they're at within their organization, and probably allow a leader to do a lot of reflection on how am I doing as a leader. So those are 2 things. I would say this much though, because at one time, I want to say I was stuck too. I had just started my 2nd consultancy. It was right after I left corporate America. And I really wanted to work with entrepreneurs. And I remember I'm a huge advocate of coaching. I have 3 coaches right now. I believe that if you have a coach for each one of the areas that are your strengths, you'll further push through any of those barriers that maybe aren't allowing you to be successful. But the coach I had back then was a sales coach. And he said, I love that entrepreneurial market too. What about them appeal to you? And I said, I love their energy. I love if they don't do it, nobody will. And I find them to be contagious. I just want to be surrounded by those types of people. And he said, like I said, I love them too. Here's the problem. You're going to go broke. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, entrepreneurs just don't have the money unless they're venture backed. They can't afford the services that you're offering. He said, but let's do this. Let's take a look at your current client base and let's identify who your ideal client base or client, what characteristics they consist of. It's the precursor to developing a marketing persona, if you will. And so we put together that type of a list. We analyzed our clients. As I mentioned, this was a brand new initiative for me. I think I was 2 months into it when I had this coaching experience. And we identified that 8 out of the 10 clients that we were working with were not only not perfect, but they were nowhere near perfect. And so we put a plan in place to allow them to exit successfully. I shared with them, I had the breakup conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's, we're looking to do things a little bit different. And so we're going to part company. But I put together a list of some other folks that are equally talented, that kind of do what it is that we're doing here. And I've already told them that you may be contacting them, and I'll provide that information to you so that way you can follow up with them. But good luck. We did that successfully with 7 of those 8 clients. They all exited. The one out of the 8 gave us the, no, I can change. And I want to say that their story kind of resonated with me because we shared a lot of similarities. Long story short, though, they changed for about a month and a half. And then they went right back to the reasons why it is that we wanted them to off-ramp. And when I had the conversation with them that time, they said, you know what? You're right. We can't change. We're always going to be a leopard with spots. Send over that list. So nice. It was a really difficult moment, I'll say also, because, a brand new consultancy, my daughters at the time were young. I remember waking up in the middle of the night in a panic attack thinking, how am I going to pay the mortgage? The utilities and the mortgage company don't care that I'm starting this new venture. They just want to know that when the first or whenever the bill date is due, that they're going to get paid, right? And I wanted to pay them. So it was a really scary time. And it was thanks to the coaching I received that allowed me to go through that moment. We replaced all 8 of those clients within a 2-month time period. And we did better. The moral of that story, though, comes down to really 2 things. I wanted to work on projects I wanted to work on with people I wanted to work on them with. And I kick myself for not identifying that earlier in my career, because I'm a guy who also comes from that big consulting world where I moved my family 5 times in 3 years, and they were big moves, right? I've lived everywhere from Midtown Manhattan to Honolulu, Hawaii. So it was really almost cross globe. But it was one of those things where I've also traveled 45 plus weeks a year. And there was a time when I was looking at we were talking about, New Jersey earlier. Mm-hmm. I was looking at the flight board at the airport in Newark, and I was like, flight canceled, delayed, canceled, delayed, canceled, delayed. And I was like, what am I doing here? Mm-hmm. Why am I doing this? And it was right around that same time that I thought back to, I'm working on projects I want to work on with people I want to work with them on. And I don't know from a business person's perspective if life gets better than that. I kicked myself for not knowing that earlier. I probably would have made 2 less moves during those consulting timeframes, but that principle has stuck with me, and it's one that I would share all of your listeners.
Thank you for that. It's one of the reasons why this whole mid-career journey is so dynamic, because we have that moment to reflect and to go back and say, gosh, maybe if I had just done this or whatever, but we're so much better for it on the other side as we move forward in all of that. And I just thank you for sharing that with us and for spending some time. Sam, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, contact you, reach out again, I'll have it all in the show notes, but people want to hear it right now. What's the best way for people to get in touch and connect with you?
Yeah, best way, tipofthespearventures.com. Again, chatbot, lower right-hand corner of the website. It's me. If I'm not on a plane or in a meeting, I'll reply right on the fly. If I don't reply right away, just drop your email or a good phone number in. I'll reach out and connect with you shortly.
Great. All right. Sam Palazzolo, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to staying connected. Everybody, please make sure to check out the show notes. And as always, remember, we build our mid-career GPSs 1 mile or 1 step at a time. And Sam did a beautiful job of exemplifying this. How we show up matters. Make it a great rest of your day. If you enjoyed today's episode and don't want to miss another one, follow on Apple Podcasts or wherever you usually listen, and kindly remember to rate and review. Visit johnneral.com to download your free job search tracker and other free mid-career GPS resources right there on my homepage so you can start building your mid-career GPS. Come join my private Facebook group at Your Mid-Career GPS and join an amazing community of people like you who are all working to figure out whatever is next for themselves and their careers. And don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn and follow me on social at John Neral Coaching. I'll see you next time.